If you don't advance your concerts or your shows the right way, you're basically asking for a miserable experience across the board. An advance is basically the thread of communication that occurs between the artist touring party, usually the tour manager or someone with the artist management, and the venue management, the promoter, the buyer, and any type of local management that is involved with putting together and creating the show. Now, I will have a full-length guide on the Final Advance website linked below that goes super nitty-gritty into the proper advancing process. And if you want to check that out, I will have a link to it in the description below. In this video, however, we're going to talk about just the overarching basics of what goes into a quality advance. As you generate questions, thoughts, concerns throughout this video, please put them in the comments. I will do my best to respond to as many of them as I can. Also, if you enjoy this video, please be sure to subscribe and check out the other touring industry videos that I have on my channel, which will be linked either in this video or in the description. And if you're new here, I am a full-time tour manager. I also come from about a decade of event production experience. So basically, I live and breathe the advancing world all day, every day. Now, it's important for me to mention that I come at this topic today, advancing, from the touring party perspective, from the side of the advancing world that has to do with the artists, meaning that I represent the artists on the tour. I am the tour manager. I am reaching out to venues, to concert halls, to theaters, to stadiums to begin the advancing process. So I come at it with that sort of perspective. However, the points that I have in this video, I think will still be helpful to the venues, the promoters, the production managers, anybody who's based on the other side of the advancing conversation with the local management, local labor groups. I think there will still be value for you in this video. Essentially, every little detail of a show needs to be confirmed and discussed in the advance so that everybody can walk into a show day and know exactly what to expect. I've done a lot of shows where, especially at the beginning of my career, when I did not take the advancing part as seriously as I do now, where we would talk about something with a promoter or a venue manager on the phone, and then we'd get there and the rigging points are off, or the accommodations aren't as we had confirmed, or labor turns out to be less than we had originally discussed. Without a paper trail, we can't really reference what was agreed upon, which is very important for the advancing process, especially if you're doing 50 to 100 to 200 shows in a row. Now, when it comes to the individuals or the members that are involved in the advance process, the typical members of an advance thread from the artist side are usually like the tour manager, myself, perhaps a production manager, somebody overseeing all the production for the show, typically some sort of a merch representative, a merch manager, a merch seller on the road. In some cases, merch sellers will do their own advance, which is great, but sometimes roles like merch, VJs, LDs, and maybe sometimes even like artist management will not do their own advance because of the size of the tour, the scale of the tour. And sometimes those individuals just aren't really familiar with how to do the advancing process. So for all intents and purposes here, everything gets sort of put into one primary thread of communication. Now, on the promoter side, or the other side of the advancing conversation, typically you will have members that are involved with venue management. They're, again, responsible for the physical space that the tour will come into and perform at. So they are basically the person responsible for confirming anything to do with the physical limitations of the space. Typically, there is also a promoter on the advanced communications. This is the person that basically is buying the show and putting together the show and organizing the entirety of the show from a logistics, marketing, ticket sales perspective. Oftentimes, especially with the bigger venues, there will be a production manager on the email communications with the venue or with the promoter, who will oversee all the additional audio, lighting, staging, SFX that we might bring in. And sometimes there are also like hospitality and merch liaisons, people that are pulling little bits and pieces from the advance for their own little respective worlds. Now, in some cases, the buyer can also be looped in, especially if there's like no response from the other advancing contacts that are listed in the deal memo, which, by the way, that's usually where you find the right person to reach out to about a show, is in the contract. In the memo, there will be usually a few different people listed, like a contract admin, a ticketing person, a marketing manager, a promoter, a production manager, etc. And like I mentioned earlier, in some cases, there can be different advanced threads, different advanced communications for independent departments. For example, production may have its own dedicated thread of communication. Merch will more than likely have its own thread of communication. Sometimes hospitality will have its own thread of communication. Basically, if the tour is big enough to where there's so many moving pieces that we need to segment it that way, it will happen. Now, when we talk about advance formatting, again, advances are typically done over email. And if you're doing 50 to 100 to 200 advances at the same time, which is like the length of a tour run, you have to stay organized. If you don't stay organized, you're going to get so lost in what you are working on. I will actually have an advanced email template on the Final Advance website, which will be linked in the description. If you want to see the way I do my advances, you can download that template and use it for yourself in your own way. But honestly, you can use whatever you want. You can format your advances in whatever way you prefer. It just needs to be consistent and concise. And some of the most important things to include in your advancing template or in your advancing email is, of course, you have to include the artist in question. You have to include the venue in question. You have to include the date of the event. These are things from a administrative standpoint to kind of like encompass what this particular advance is about. And from an archive perspective, it's easy to go through your inbox if you have all of these elements in the subject header. So artist in question, venue in question, the date of the event, also the location or the city of the event, and any other topic notes that are relevant to that advance. So for example, if this is an advanced thread for production, I'll usually put production in the header, or I'll put SFX or merch in the header if the advanced thread is about merch. Now, when it comes to putting things into the advance, into like what are the elements that we need to include in the advance as a touring artist or touring group, and it's going to vary based on what your tour actually is, what you're bringing, what your needs are. But there are some general good things to include in the advanced thread. And this is especially relevant to tours that are traveling. So if you're traveling with a tour bus, a bandwagon, a van and trailer, it's very important to include all of these things in your advance. So you almost always want to include information about what you are using for transportation. How are you traveling to the show? If you have a bus or a bandwagon or personal cars, you need to make sure that there's parking. You need to coordinate shore power if it is a bus or a bandwagon. If not, you need to be prepared to run your generator. You need to ask about any kind of hours for, like, if there's a gated lot. Basically, you need to tell them what you're coming in so that they can make sure they will accommodate for you. Because if you haven't been on the road with a bus or a bandwagon yet, they're very big and it can be very tricky to maneuver them in tight spaces. And sometimes music venues are in the middle of a city. And so you have to get really ahead of where you're going to park that thing. You also typically want to include a list of all of your band and crew members for credentials. Now, in some cases, artists may have some non-disclosure agreements and you can't give away their personal information. That's fine. My point is that you need to tell the promoter what you can about who will be coming, because this is good for security, this is good for credential purposes, and if there are buyouts, this gives them a head count. Of course, you want to make sure you include all of your writers, your tech writer, your hospitality writer, your production writer. That's kind of a no-brainer. You also want to make sure you give them your stage plot and input lists. Typically, this will be in either the tech or the production writer, but giving them that information up front will help set them up for success. And of course, you want to give them a good day of show contact. Typically, in my case, as the tour manager, I will always put my phone number in the email thread so that they know they can reach out to me about anything. Now, when it comes to asking questions, what are the questions you should be asking in the advanced thread? Really, this is your chance to ask anything and everything that you need to set up for a successful show. So some of the more common requests or asks that I will see in the advance and that I do in all of my advances are things like, how much labor do we have for load in and load out? I do this in order to make sure we have what's guaranteed in the deal, but also because I need to know for our personal internal staffing, do I need to prepare for extra load in time? Do I need to prepare for all hands on deck for the load out? I need to know all these things. It's also important to ask about the run of show for the entire day, right? What time do we have a load in? What time can we actually get into the room and start building? What time can we do our sound checks? What time are doors as advertised? What time is the curfew for not only the stage, but what's the curfew for the backstage, for the green rooms, for the showers? The last thing you want is to finish a loadout and find out that you guys can't use the showers. That will lead to a very unhappy bus. Also, making sure to ask for contact information for relevant parties that come with the venue or the promoter, people like the production manager, the merch representative, the LD, etc. Again, you can use this portion of your advance, the question portion of your advance, just to sort of double check and make sure that the deal points that were agreed upon are still expected and will be delivered. So you can ask about catering budget allocation. You can ask about agreements on merchandise split. You can ask about production that's going to be provided in-house. And finally, the last bit here about advancing is the follow-up etiquette. And again, I find this section to be important because people have a lot of different views and opinions on what is the proper advance etiquette. And I can never pretend to have all the answers. The way I do things is the way that I have found to be successful for me. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there, maybe you watching, have your own way of how you like to follow up with your advances. But typically, this is what I believe. And of course, there are always going to be corner cases, but I believe that if your show is 2 to 3 months out, so if your show is 2 or 3 months away, it is okay to check in on an advance thread every other week. 2 months out, every other week follow-ups is great. Now, once the show becomes, once the show gets to the 1 month or less window, if the show is a month away or sooner, it is absolutely okay and important to start checking in on advanced threads weekly. And if your show is within a 2-week time frame or shorter, then I believe that daily check-ins on the advance are absolutely acceptable. And if you're talking within the week of show, it's perfectly acceptable to text the promoter or text the production manager and be like, hey, I need some information on this, or like, hey, can we hop on a call? I will say, it's like, just in general though, coming from my previous production world, it's important to remember that venues have a lot of shows before yours. Most venues are doing concerts 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. So try to give them a little bit of time, because while you are worried about your show in 3 weeks, there are 6 other bands that have shows this coming weekend and the next weekend that are also worrying about their shows, and they have to have priority because their shows are up next. Likewise, playing devil's advocate, I will say that venues should understand that artists on tour need to make decisions well ahead of time about things like production. If we're going to bring production, we have to book flights, we have to book hotels, and the longer we wait, the more our costs go up, which is just not a good time. Okay, and finally, thanks for staying until the end of this video. My secret tip for how I like to advance my shows is when initiating my advanced threads, when I do my first initial outreach in an advanced thread, what I like to do is I write out the entire advance email very thoroughly, take my time, I make sure nothing's missed, I include all the relevant information, and then I schedule the email to be sent to the promoter or the buyer at a favorable day and time. So for example, if I write the advance email on Sunday afternoon, which is a good time for me typically because things are kind of slow, I have time in my office, I can actually sit down and dig through all of the nitty-gritty details. I won't send it on Sunday because Sunday is not like a proper work day. And if somebody gets an email on a Sunday that's, this long, they're going to be sort of unhappy about it. I mean, I probably wouldn't even look at it until the next day, but by then it's like kind of in the back of my mind. So what I do instead is I schedule that email to be sent at a more favorable time, typically like a Tuesday morning, right? Giving them Monday the buffer of the new work week. With a Tuesday send, it looks like I'm up early, they get the email, their mind is fresh, and they're able to just go through everything right then and there. It also sets a good tone, and it kind of, again, just demonstrates consideration for the promoter and the venue's schedules. And in my experience, if you can have your advanced communications go well, it helps prepare for a more successful show. Well, thanks for watching, guys. That is how to properly advance your shows. Again, I will have a full in-depth guide about advancing with like templates and downloadable templates you can use in your advanced processes. I will have a link to that in the description if you want to check that out. Make sure you guys follow the YouTube channel for more videos like this. And if you have any questions about this topic or any other topic in the music and touring industry, please put it in the comments. I will absolutely check it out. Also, one last shameless plug. I do have a YouTube channel dedicated to the BTS, behind the scenes experiences of being on the road. And I'll have a link to that on this video or in the description as well. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next video.